In this edition of the Bucs Report, we talk about this off season of the unknown for this Bucs team. We'll talk about all of that and more next on this edition of the Bucs Report. Let's go! Well, hello and welcome into this edition of the Bucs Report. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms. You can find it on the Bucs Report. Check it out online, bucsreport.com. You can find it on YouTube. Just search for the Bucs Report. And of course, you can find this audio podcast wherever you find your audio podcasts. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Bucs Minutecast. So in this edition of the Bucs Report, we are happy to have JC Allen on the show. JC, welcome to the show.
How you doing, man? Nice to be here.
So just taking a look at this Bucs season, we are heading into a season of the unknown, shall we say, as the Bucs, especially at the quarterback position and the offensive coordinator. What is your outlook for this team in the offseason? Do you think that they are going to end up picking up a different quarterback? Do you think Tom Brady returns? What's the outlook for the Bucs this offseason?
Yeah, I think it could go one of two ways, right? The situation with Tom is he's taking it day by day. People close to Tom, they're still kind of figuring out where he's going to be in this process. I woyou say right now he's probably leaning a little bit more towards retirement than coming back. But if he does come back, I just don't see another fit besides the Buccaneers. Really, when you factor in all the outside factors from football, when you factor all the football factors, they just don't make any sense. San Francisco, while is a team that could be ready to win now, and they could win now if Brock Purdy wins the 49ers the Super Bowl, I don't expect them to move on from him, especially with Trey Lance waiting on the wings. Much has been made about the Raiders as a possible destination. We heard from Gronk and Dana White this past season that it would almost happen before John Gruden nixed the idea. I just think at this point in his career, they have a lot of holes on there. Sure, they have Darren Waller and they have Devontae Adams. That offensive line needs a lot of work. They've got some pieces on defense, but they still are more than one or two defensive pieces away. And Josh Jacobs' uncertainty with the franchise is known after the decline of his fifth-year option. All that being said, the relationship with Josh McDaniels is there from their time in New England together. But I just feel like geography-wise, it's just too far away from Miami where his kids are going to be living. It's a 4 or 5 hour private jet plane ride there and back. I just don't think it makes much sense logistically. The Titans have been brandished about, obviously, the relationship with Mike Vrabel. I think they as well are missing pieces. Offensive line needs work. Defense needs work. Wide receivers, while Treylon Burks looks like he could potentially be a good player. Still don't have an established guy there, and Derrick Henry is another year older. Jets have been mentioned, as have the Dolphins. Problem with the Jets and the Dolphins, along with the Raiders and the Titans, is they play in a very difficult AFC conference. Obviously, the Bills, the Bengals, and the Chiefs are at the cream of the crop there right now. But the AFC East is not what it was when Brady was there. It's a very difficult division. The Jets looked really good before quarterback controversies and injuries hit them pretty hard. The Dolphins made the playoffs even without Tua. And when they did have Tua, they were one of the better teams in the NFL. And the Bills, as mentioned before, they're a tough team. If he goes to the Jets, I just don't see that as a possible fit. While they have definitely some good young players, on both sides of the ball. The AFC conference, AFC East division, he's going to play Belichick twice a year in the Patriots. I don't know if he wants that drama. And besides that, the drama of New York as well. If you think, he's had the laid back, low key lifestyle in Tampa, I don't know if he wants to go out to New York and and be subject to paparazzi on all the spotlight. And the Dolphins, I don't know if they're ready to move on from Mike McDaniels, and his offense just isn't suited for a 45-year-old, soon to be 46-year-old immobile quarterback. So while they do have some good pieces at wide receiver and a couple pieces on defense, again, the offensive line and the defense still need work there too. So I think Tampa presents him the best chance. He knows the staff, he knows the ownership, he knows the players. He's got chemistry with those guys. Offensive coordinator was a huge thing holding this team back this season. They're moving on from Byron Leftwich. They started the interview process. And I think the location, just being 40 minutes away from his kids on a private jet, 3 hours in a car ride, is just too much of a convenience for him at this stage in his life. So I don't see anywhere other than Tampa as a real destination or a real possible landing spot for Tom if he does decide to come back for his 24th season.
I guess part of the question why people were wondering where is he going to end up is this was retweeted by Rick Stroud, is that Brady's house is now for rent at a whopping $60,000 per month. I saw it listed on Zillow. So I do think that is kind of what's fueling at least part of this. And I understand that he could be moving or something like that. But do you ultimately think that he will come back? One of the things that Rick Stroud brought up is he said, would the Bucs even want him back? And I guess what they mean when they say that is they saw what they had in Brady this last year. Let's face it, this isn't the Tom Brady that we've seen in years before. Some passes were underthrown. They were overthrown. Do you think that ultimately that Tom Brady is a good fit on this Bucs team going forward next season?
Oh, absolutely. And I think if you look at the whole is his house is on the market for rent, I think is a little bit overblown. You remember that's the house that he was in. Giselle kind of blindsided him during training camp, ending their marriage. That's the house that he spent the last couple of years with Giselle and the kids. He's probably going to be downsizing from that. So I don't think that plays much into it. And, Tom was under immense, stress, with his family on the field, off the field, issues with the coordinator and the play calling. Obviously the divorce and, being separated from his kids, etc. That's a huge shock to the system when you're coming home from work, even though you work crazy hours like Tom does and you're studying and you've got all these off-field things, to be able to come home after a long day of all that and still be able to see your kids and spend time with your kids. It goes a long way to not have that because now they're in Miami or now they're with Giselle for most of the time. That weighs on you and the stress. And, he looked noticeably thinner. He lost about 15 pounds of weight due to that stress, which potentially impacted his ability on the field. You got a lot of things weighing on your mind and a lot of those times too with his inaccurate throws because, he needs to take some of the blame too, not making any excuses here. But a lot of times on those, especially those deeper passes, he wasn't able to pull it, to put his full force into it. The line was collapsing. He wasn't able to step with it with his feet and really get into those throws. So I think if Brady wants to come back, they're going to let him. They're going to welcome him with open arms. He's still a quarterback. When he had time, he was making the throws, the tight window throws. He's still a guy who can at 40, 45, 46 when the season rolls around, can make all the throws and can really kind of dictate where he wants to go and read the defenses. So if he's going to play in Tampa Bay and Tampa Bay is his preferred destination, they're going to welcome back with open arms.
So
it also helps him with the cap.
Right. Well, one of the things that Greg Auman wrote today is he said, for Bucs, it made sense to borrow from future years to make the most of a championship window with Brady. Are you better spending $30 million early to support him or $30 million down the road to support the next guy? The Bucs are $55 million over the projected 2023 salary cap of $225 million, requiring a ton of maneuvering before they can re-sign their first impending free agent. So that is the biggest question, I guess, kind of the biggest hiccup of having Tom Brady come back is going to be able to sign him to a new deal. And if they do bring Tom Brady back, what kind of weaponry is he going to have at his disposal? There's a lot of pending free agents on this team.
Right. And I think if Brady comes back, it actually helps you because you can restructure that deal. You kick the can down the road even further. But this Bucs team, if you look at this NFC conference, the 49ers and the Eagles rose to the top. Other than that, everybody else was just kind of pretenders. The Vikings, the Giants, the Cowboys, as we know, as usual, they weren't. This was a very weak conference, and we know things can change. Parity in the league, especially the last few years, can change at the drop of a dime. But the NFC South, the NFC as a whole, still looks like a pretty winnable conference, if not a very winnable division, pending the moves that other teams make. So I think, you're still in this championship window. When they re-signed a majority of their free agents last year, they locked them up to 3-year deals. So there's still plenty of weaponry on the offensive side of the ball. The only big name free agent really on offense is going to be Julio Jones. They'll probably move on from Cam Brate, Russell Gage. They have a, you know, he's making $10 million next year. They can move on from him and keep 2. But you still have Chris. You still have Mike. Potentially Gronk comes back. Rashad White, Kate Otten both showed a lot of promise. I expect them to add a wide receiver in the draft, maybe a running back as well, get more speed on this offensive side of the ball, and that's going to help open things up. The defense is where a majority of these free agents that are really going to impact this team lie. So that's Todd Bowles' specialty is getting the guys he wants. Not even big names, but free agents that can play the way he wants to. The Bucs did it last year with guys like Logan Ryan and Keanu Neal, bringing them in. They've got some big decisions to make, but bringing Tom back will help them open up some of that money. They're going to have to restructure a bunch of guys' deals with Shaq Barrett, Chris Godwin, probably an extension and restructure for Mike Evans, etc., to open up that cap space. I don't expect them to be on a free agent frenzy, but if Brady's coming back, Gronk comes back with them, this team is still loaded for another potential run, and they'll probably get some veterans coming in on the minimum to help them fill out that roster, as well as some young draft picks and guys who maybe want a chance to play with Brady or just kind of jumpstart their career. Kind of like Keanu Neal-esque, who kind of bounced around, and maybe he wants an opportunity. Maybe they want an opportunity to come play with Tampa. Tom in Bulls defense, that's very beneficial to especially edge rushers and guys who get after the quarterback. So, I still think there's moves they can make. I think Tom Brady coming back helps to make those moves. Even if he doesn't, if he decides to step away and retire, I think he redoes his deal in order to help them free up some cap space. So, I still think this is a championship window and a contender for the Bucs, and they can continue to be that going next year if Brady comes back.
So then the other big story out there, of course, is Todd Bowles. They moved on from Byron Leftwich. Just taking a look at moving on from him, just some questions. You take a look at 2019, he was ranked 3rd in points, 2020 3rd, 2021 2nd. In 2022, he was ranked 25th Bucs scoring average and NFL rankings in 4 seasons with Byron Leftwich as the offensive coordinator. So what ultimately happened with Byron Leftwich this offseason or this last season that he wasn't getting that same production that he was in the previous years? He was the offensive coordinator.
Yeah, I think if you look at those numbers, and it doesn't really tell the complete story there. With Byron Leftwich, the last couple of years, he got really great output from the playmakers on the team. You go from having Ali Marpet, Alex Kappa, Ryan Jensen as 3 potential Pro Bowl linemen. You have Gronk, who's a future Hall of Famer. You have AB, who, besides all his antics, has the resume of a Hall of Famer. The Bucs pretty much just simply went out there and out talented guys. And that was especially true in 2020 and 2021. This past season, they didn't have that same level of talent. They didn't have the same talent on the offensive line with Ryan Jensen going down and Ali Marpet. Didn't have the same talent at wide receiver. Chris Godwin was working his way back from torn ACL and didn't really come into his own till, the midway point through the season. So it was kind of exposed as a play caller. This wasn't, a lot of people like to think this was the only year where there was issues with the play calling. It really wasn't. These go back to 2019. These go back to especially last year. And since Byron really took over calling the plays, first down runs have been something that's plagued this team the last couple of years. They were just able to overcome it on second and third down because they had the playmakers to to beat coverage. When you have four guys with, three guys with Hall of Fame resumes and one guy who's a perennial, 1,000-yard receiver and Chris Godwin, you can't double anybody. You got a single coverage and someone's always going to beat the coverage. That wasn't the case this year. They're trotting out guys who were banged up most of the season, and Julio Jones and Russell Gage and rookies and Kate Otten, using guys like Brashad Perriman, Scotty Miller sometimes. It just wasn't the same level of talent. And Byron just wasn't able to adapt. We didn't see him change many things. He didn't make any adjustments. Utilize play action as much as he should have when the Bucs were one of the best to use it. Even though the running game was atrocious, their play action rate was still one of the best in the league. Passing on first down in neutral situations was still one of the best in the league. And they continued to run the ball and put themselves into second and long, third and long situations. And the problem is they couldn't out talent teams anymore. They didn't do enough to scheme guys open. They knew they didn't have a lot of speed on this offense and refused to play a guy like Scotty Miller who could have helped you some of those mismatch. There was just a lot of things, that you can look to on the field and see. And then there was stuff behind the scenes as well. Bulls wanted them to run the ball more and run the ball in situations where it wasn't going to be as predictable. Byron on several occasions didn't run the ball. I mean, you look at that Kansas City game, they had 3 rushing attempts. So it was just there was a lot of drama behind the scenes and a lot of fluctuation between coaches and players, especially Byron Leftwich, and he just kind of ran his course. Bowles was hamstrung last year with everybody on this staff. He had to keep them given the time that he was handed over the keys to the franchise March 30th. There wasn't time for him, and he had to kind of just play the hand he was given and rely on his defense that they were going to be able to stop teams from scoring and hope that his offense could catch up. It never happened. Byron was a huge part of that. It's not to take away blame of players not executing, including Tom Brady, but Byron was a really big part of that. And I think if you look at the head coaching, the offensive coordinator candidates, these guys are creative. These guys, have utilized offenses and wide receivers in different ways. They've been part of unique game plans, and that's something that we didn't see out of the Bucs at all, really, outside of, I think, that Carolina Panthers game where they came out the gate, play action in the first play, came out passing, utilized the rushing attack when they did as well. And that was really one of the only complete games we saw from the Bucs all season. And I think that's kind of what led to Byron's demise.
So do you think the Bucs did the right thing by getting rid of Byron Leftwich? I know
Absolutely.
to a certain extent, it seems like he's a bit of a fall guy, but the consensus and kind of my observations as well is that he was getting to be too predictable. And, I've had different guests on this show, and they think that ultimately the reason that he had such a bad season this season making calls is that he didn't have kind of Bruce Arians looking over his shoulders. How much did Bruce Arians kind of factor into what kind of play calling Byron Leftwich was doing, do you think?
Zero. Bruce hasn't really done much. And that's not to take away what he's done, the staff that he's assembled, but he hasn't really done much since Brady got here. He's been pretty hands-off, letting Byron run the offense, letting Bowles run the defense, obviously managing on game days, kind of throwing his wrinkles in here and there. But for the most part, the last 3 years, it's been all Byron calling these plays. It's been all Byron. And again, he's benefited from Hall of Famers everywhere and Pro Bowlers everywhere. And I mean, Dan Orlovsky said it best. The scheme that they run is archaic. They don't utilize motion. They don't utilize play action. They don't utilize a lot of things. It's very predictable. Teams know it's coming. I mean, there were multiple times this year that we got mic'd up footage from players that knew exactly what they were going to run, what plays they were running, because they don't change things up. These go back to last year. I had my arguments with Byron this year. I had them last year asking him about the predictor of running the ball on first down. If you think teams would catch on to that, pretty much called it a fantasy football question. Asked them again this year about EPA, the difference between the EPA when passing on neutral first down situations and running, bottom of the league towards top of the league. Kind of laughed it off. What's EPA? Asked fantasy questions. Yeah, these are the type of situations where he was hesitant to use analytics and put them and utilize them towards the offense and help this offense grow. He was very stubborn in what he did as a play caller, and it's been him the last couple of years. And the only reason why we have extremely different results this season compared to the last two seasons is the talent that was around. The Bucs could simply out talent other defenses. This year was not the case. There were no adjustments made. They didn't do what they were good at. They continued to do what they were bad at, and we saw the results with an 8-9 season with a first-round playoff exit.
So the question now is, do you think that the Bucs would have been better to just have a complete clean slate by getting rid of Todd Bowles as well?
No, not at all. I think Todd is very respected in that building. I think he wasn't able to implement the things that he wanted to implement, the tweaks he wanted to make, because everything was already in place. I mean, when BA stepped down, one of the biggest reasons why he did that, because he wanted all of his guys to have jobs. It's a family to him. And we saw, we've heard reports that he's extremely upset about it and that don't expect to see him around the Bucs facility as much this year. We saw his wife take to Twitter and vocalize her, thoughts about letting some of these guys go and firing them, and some of these guys kind of forcing them to retire instead of firing them. So, I think Bowles needs this opportunity. We've heard him talk about camaraderie, culture, and changing that work ethic. I think that's a big thing when people say, we just changed the culture. I think Bruce Arians was a very laid back coach. And some of these guys, Bowles' comments earlier in the season of these guys are living in a fantasy dreamland, living off the Super Bowl. When you win, you get all these acknowledgments and everything like that. And some of these things might have gotten to some of the players' head. And, maybe the effort wasn't there. Bowles is a defensive guy. He wants his teams to be tough, hard-nosed football players that put in the work and grind. And there are certainly guys on the team that did that, while other guys kind of just showed up and thought, hey, we're the Bucs. We got Brady. How many times do we hear from the guys this season after a game? When we got Brady, we know we're always in it. Well, you can't take that for granted, and you got to put the work in. You got to put the time in. And I think that's kind of what Bowles meant by changing this culture. And I think, with a off season to really kind of go into, most of the draft was planned. Free agency was already over. He can go out there, get with Jason Light, say, okay, these are the guys I'm looking for. We don't have much to spend in free agency, but these are the guys who aren't going to break, cost an arm and a leg, and who fit what I want to build here. These are the guys in the draft I'm looking for. Smart, fast, tough guys. And he's going to be able to bring these players in, and, hopefully everyone, all the holdovers, as he said, if you're privileged enough to come back, buy into what he's trying to do and try to build the team he wants to compete. Because like I said, this team is still very much in the hunt, even without Brady, and at least in the hunt for a potential NFC South Division title. And that's all you need is a ticket to the dance. We've seen it before with teams. Heck, the Bucs were a wild card team in 2020. They won the whole thing, but we've seen it with multiple teams who just, you get in the dance, you get hot, and you can win the whole thing. And I think that's Bowles deserves a second year. He deserves to pick his staff. He deserves to get the guys who he wants in here. And let's see what he does. If he flounders, hey, then we can talk about getting rid of Bowles. But did he make some questionable calls with field goals and timeouts, etc.? Yeah, I think so. But I think a lot of that was part of, I don't trust the offense. I trust my defense to make a stop more than I trust the offense. And heck, if we can just get 3 points on the board, I don't think the offense is going to get there. So he played a little cowardly at sometimes on 4th and 3s and 4th and 1s and situations like that when he was, kicking field goals that probably were out of Ryan Succop's distance. But the way the offense have played this year, can you blame him?
So the question now then is, do you think that Tom Brady is making any moves, or do you think he's talking to the Bucs organization to maybe make suggestions on who the next offensive coordinator could be? I think that there was probably some disenchantment between him and Byron Leftwich. You could kind of see it between the two of them. Do you think that he's saying, hey guys, and I'm kind of, paraphrasing what he might be saying, if you really want me to come back, you should probably go after this guy or that guy. Do you think there's any of that going on?
Absolutely not. I think they're keeping Brady in the loop, but I don't think Brady's going to dictate who comes in as OC. Remember, Bowles is trying to get a coach in there that is going to be there for the long run, not just 1 year for Brady. I mean, if that was the case, they would have sold the farm for Bill O'Brien and try to get him here for potentially 1 year. Any coach that takes this job has to know, that there's potential that they could be back in the market next year. I wouldn't say Bowles is on a hot seat, but I would say his seat is a little warm after the success the Bucs have had the last 3 seasons, the national media, the spotlight, the merchandise, the ticket sales, etc. I don't think the Glazers want to go back to living in mediocrity and not making the playoffs for another 13 years or whatever it was. So I do think his seat's a little warm, but I don't think he's going to pick an offensive coordinator directly to appease Brady. I'm sure they'll say, "Hey, we've interviewed these guys, and just to let you know, do any of these guys kind of move the needle for you at all?" But I don't think they base it solely on what would bring Brady back. I definitely think they'll keep him in the loop in that regard. But I don't think he's sitting there like, "Hey, I want this guy, or this guy. If you don't bring any of these guys in, forget about it. I'm not coming back." But I do think offensive coordinator is going to be a big part of him coming back. I'm sure he'll talk to whoever they hire to get a feel for him and see if it's something that he wants to be a part of. If he wants to come back and be part of "quote unquote" the solution to figuring out how to get the Bucs back on top. And I think it's a real possibility that I don't think it will influence. He'll influence, but I think the OC, whoever they pick as an OC, will influence his decision to come back.
So I guess the next biggest thing. So say Tom Brady doesn't come back. Who do you believe will be the next quarterback? Do they have someone in Kyle Trask who's been redshirted his entire career, or do they have Gabbert, who I believe is kind of like a solid backup, but he needs a new contract as well? Who do you ultimately think will be the starter? Or do you think something crazy will happen? They'll try to draft yet another quarterback. What are their options if Brady does decide to move on?
So I think Trask, it's going to be, if Brady does move on, I don't necessarily think Gabbert comes back. I think the only way Gabbert and maybe Griffin come back are if Brady is back as well, just because of the experience and because of, Brady uses Gabbert as basically another coach on the sideline to come back and run things by, and he helps him prepare tremendously. If Brady's not back, I don't sense either of those players will be back. I think they'll either, spending a draft pick on a quarterback, I'm of the school of thought that you should always be developing quarterbacks. Even if you have one developmental quarterback, get another one. But there are veterans out there that could potentially, pique their interest. Guys like maybe Jacoby Brissett, who's given the Bucs problems in the past. Maybe a Taylor Heineke, maybe a Gardner Minshew. I don't think they're necessarily going to make a swing for a big name quarterback. Aaron Rodgers, the Packers aren't going to trade him within the NFC. It looks like he's probably going to the Jets if he doesn't come back to Green Bay. Derek Carr is not a name I'm interested in. According to reports, the whole meltdown of Derek Carr's season was because of Josh McDaniels kind of doing what Belichick did to Brady, calling him out, putting extra emphasis on him, kind of, making him the spotlight. And he didn't take it well. He thought Josh McDaniels was picking on him. That's not the mindset I want from a quarterback. But again, obviously he's got tons of talent. I don't really know if there's anyone out there on the free agent market really that's going to move the needle for Bucs fans at all. I say Jacoby Brissett because he's got some maneuverability in the pocket. He's a big guy, tough to tackle, has experience in plenty of systems. Started for the Browns the first 10 games this season. Taylor Heineke's another guy, starting experience. He's given the Bucs some problems when playing them. Gardner Minshew, another guy who could potentially be a starter in this league, most likely, better suited as a backup, but that's the type of player that they'd bring in. And as far as drafting, they are sitting at 19. If they want to trade the farm and move up and try to grab one of those quarterbacks, they can. They could wait and grab one in the later rounds. But I don't see that with as many holes as they have on this roster, them trading a future first round pick, a second round pick, in addition to their first round pick, to try to move up into that top 10 to maybe try to grab a guy like a Will Levis or a CJ Stroud or something like that. I don't think Anthony Richardson would be on the table for them. He's another guy who's more of a developmental guy, and you need someone who can come and start right away. But getting a veteran in here to compete with Trask and potential, mystery third string quarterback, I could definitely see that being a possibility.
So definitely a lot of questions for Jason Light and the Glazers to answer this offseason. JC, I want to thank you for joining us on this edition of the Bucs Report. Why don't you tell all of the listeners where we can find your work?
Absolutely. First of all, happy to be back. I don't know if you know, but this is where I came up, Bucs Report. So I'm always happy to come back and be a part of the show and what they're doing good things over there. Never a bad word to say about my time with Bucs Report. So, but other than that, you guys can find me. I'm over at Pewter Report now. You can find me on Twitter at JCAllenNFL. All of our content at pewterreport.com. Follow us at Pewter Report on Twitter. And also check out our YouTube channel, Pewter Report TV. We just went over 10,000 subscribers. We got podcasts 4 days a week. And we've always got some cool, interesting things going on over there. So, hey, thanks for your time, Dan. Thanks for having me on, man. And we'll have to do this again.
All right. Thanks.